So, there's this huge new study that's just uncovered what looks like a hidden health crisis in Ethiopia. And honestly, the numbers tell a really powerful story. We're going to break down exactly what's going on, why it matters so much, and what it might mean for the rest of the world. Let's dive in. Okay, let's start with a thought experiment. What if 5 separate silent health risks decided to kind of team up against your body? What would that even look like? Well, it actually has a name, and that's exactly what this explainer is all about.
Here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to define this dangerous team-up. Then, we'll see why it's becoming a serious threat in Ethiopia by looking at the hard numbers. We'll zero in on who's most at risk, decode the biggest factors driving it, and finally, look at the urgent call for action that the researchers are making.
Right, so before we get to the data from Ethiopia, we need to make sure we're all on the same page about what this threat actually is. It's called metabolic syndrome, or MetS for short. The best way to think about it isn't as one single disease, but as this nasty combination of risk factors. You need at least 3 of these 5 things to be diagnosed: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, too much belly fat, high triglycerides, and low good cholesterol. And the real key here is that together, their power to cause damage is way, way bigger than any one of them on its own. And believe me, that damage is no joke. The research shows that having metabolic syndrome makes you 2 to 3 times more likely to have a stroke or heart disease. And get this, it multiplies your risk of developing type 2 diabetes by a staggering 6 times. This is exactly why it's such a massive deal for public health. Okay, now let's zoom in on Ethiopia. To get a handle on the situation, researchers did what's called a meta-analysis, which is a fancy way of saying they combined the data from 28 different studies to create one giant, super powerful data set. Let's see what they uncovered.
So, the researchers point out that Ethiopia, like a lot of places in sub-Saharan Africa, is going through these massive, rapid changes. We're talking about more people moving to cities, diet shifting to more processed foods, people being less physically active, and just higher stress levels all around. It's basically creating the perfect storm for diseases like MetS to really take hold.
And boom, here's the first big finding that really puts it all into perspective. The estimated global average for metabolic syndrome is somewhere around 20 to 25%. But as you can see, the combined data from this study shows the rate in Ethiopia is way, way higher than that. So let's get into those core findings. This is where the true scale of the problem really starts to become crystal clear.
Now, to be extra thorough, the researchers used 2 different international yardsticks to measure this. The first one, called NCEP/ATP3, is pretty flexible. Any 3 of the 5 risk factors, and you've got it. The second, from the International Diabetes Federation, is a bit stricter. It requires you to have abdominal obesity as a starting point. And as you can see, both methods pointed to high numbers, but that more flexible definition revealed a prevalence that is truly eye-water.
And here it is, the headline number, 34.89%. Just let that sink in for a moment. Based on this data, more than 1 out of every 3 people in the groups they studied has metabolic syndrome. That's a huge, huge figure. But, an overall number never tells the whole story, does it? The really fascinating insights come when the researchers start to slice up the data and see who's being hit the hardest. First off, there's a really clear gender split. The study found that about 25% of males had MetS, but that number jumps to over 34% for females. The researchers suggest that a few things could be contributing here, like differences in physical activity or hormonal changes related to menopause. And this is where the numbers just go through the roof. Among the general working adults they looked at, the rate was about 18%. But look what happens for patients who already have high blood pressure. It more than doubles to nearly 45%. And for patients with type 2 diabetes, it's a jaw-dropping 64%. That means nearly 2 out of every 3 diabetes patients in these studies also had metabolic syndrome. Okay, so we know the overall problem is big, and we know who is most at risk. But which specific parts of this syndrome are actually driving these numbers? Let's decode the components.
This chart breaks down just how common each of the 5 risk factors were. You can see things like high blood sugar and hypertension were a factor in over a quarter of the cases. High triglycerides, which is a type of fat in your blood, were found in almost 40% of people, and abdominal obesity in about 36%. But one of these slices is clearly much, much bigger than the rest.
Yep, the number 1 culprit is low HDLC. You might know HDL as the good cholesterol, because it helps clean up the bad stuff in your bloodstream. Having low levels of it was a factor in 51% of the people studied. That's more than half. This is an absolutely vital clue when it comes to figuring out the best ways to fight this.
And that brings us to our final section. What does this all mean? What's the ultimate message from the scientists who spent all this time putting this data together?
I want to read this quote directly from the study's conclusion because you can just feel the urgency in their words. They write, "MetS is growing at an alarming rate and is high in Ethiopia. Therefore, policymakers, clinicians, and concerned stakeholders shall urge effective strategies in the control, prevention, and management of MetS." I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that. It's a direct call for immediate action.
So, to wrap it all up with a quick recap, metabolic syndrome is a dangerous team-up of health risks. This massive study found its prevalence in Ethiopia is incredibly high. We're talking more than 1 in 3 people. The risk is highest for women and for people who already have conditions like diabetes. The single biggest driver is low good cholesterol, and the authors are basically sounding the alarm, calling for urgent strategies to prevent and manage this crisis.
And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. The very things driving this trend in Ethiopia, urbanization, big shifts in diet, less physical activity, those things are happening all over the world. So the real question is, as these lifestyles continue to change everywhere, where might this alarming trend pop up next?